Welcome to the Non-Essential Podcast. I'm Steve Gibson.
I'm Ben Matlock.
And I'm Kelly Bristol.
Oh my God, a third person.
Jesus.
I'm really just a sentient bag of glitter-covered bees.
We're still trying to figure out. Science is still trying to figure that out.
We brought you on then to generate a lot of buzz for this episode.
I fucking hate that sentence. Take it back.
You're fired.
We're replacing you with bees as well. Yeah, so we brought Kelly back. She was on, I think last time you were on was December, so it's been a grip. It's been a minute.
Yes.
I know you've been out and about. You've been going to events and concerts and having fun, and we said that doesn't sound right. You should be back here while
suffering like the rest of us.
And ironically, as soon as you invited me back, one of my neighbors backed up our entire sewer system, and we've been dealing with that for the last few days. So
the pipes.
It just feels right now. 2019 is really feeling good and normal.
We tried to warn everybody because people were like, "Thank God 2018's over," and it's like there's no guarantee 19's any better. The trend is still pointing downward.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm liking it, but that's just because I'm getting the video games I want. But yeah, last week we talked about some shit, and now we have some new shit. If you've never heard this show, we talk about shit. So we didn't really talk about how we were going to do it today. Kelly, you have a topic.
For once, yes.
Well, out of 3 so far, I think you're doing okay.
Right.
But did you want to go first, or did you want to save your presentation till the end of class? What type of student were you?
Let's go ahead and rip off the band. All right. So let me bring up my notes here.
Oh, notes. You're just supposed to make stuff up as you go.
That was always my thing in school was I always wanted to let's just fucking do the presentation and get it over with. And every group I ever ended up in was like, let's go last. I don't want to, I'm nervous. And I'm like, I don't care. You're not going to be less nervous.
That just gives you time to sit there and get more nervous, right?
Exactly. Exactly. I'd just rather get it done.
You're going to sit there for an hour while the ass sweat accumulates. And you're going to just you're not going to fucking be able to handle it. Let's just do this.
Granted, every once in a while you could kind of surf out that clock until it's the teacher's like, oh man, you guys got to go, but you've only got 3 minutes. It's thank you.
But that always, for me, that never worked. It was always well, we'll continue with you next time. Fuck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You'll be the only group going that day, and it'll be super fucking awkward. So congrats.
Yeah, that's how it always ended up for my group project. So I got to the point where I'm like, let's just go get it done. And then we can just hang back and watch everybody else flail.
Right.
That sometimes worked. Sometimes I got voted down, but I tried.
Teacher knew you were trying to throw your fellow students under the bus.
Oh, I did that with every group project because I wound up doing everything.
Yeah, that's how it usually goes.
So then it's I was all nice and friendly. Oh yeah, I'll give you a great write up when the teacher asks what your contribution was, and then on the actual contribution,
fuck all.
I am the bus. I am the bus wheels, and these poor people were trodden underneath me.
Jimmy worked hard on 2 things: Jack and shit.
That's not too far off what I wrote on one of my last group project evaluation.
I remember, and we're way off our fucking show thing, but whatever. In college, I had a presentation. It was a quarter long. You were assigned this at the beginning of the quarter. You had to have the presentation done by the end. And one of the girls in my group didn't do anything until she came up to us 2 days before finals, when the presentations were, and was like, I don't have anything ready. And it was and it was one of those situations where well, fuck, I have to help you because I don't want to fail. Okay, finals day, let's get here an hour early before you have to take a finals test. We'll take whatever the hell you have and I'll bullshit the presentation for you and help you out. I get there an hour early. She does not. She oversleeps the hour and shows up for her test, but doesn't have time to work on this. And it's one of those like, fuck, okay, just give me the notes you have and I'll put it in the PowerPoint and come back here fucking immediately after that test, because you need to, I'm not talking about this part for you. You need to do it. So you need to know what it's going to say. And we did okay. Like, we got like a B, I think, but it was just like, oh man, that was a review, like a group review worth reading, where I was just like,
my best one, and it was great because it was literally my very last class I ever took in college. It was the last one I needed to graduate, but it was one that only came up like once every 2 years. So basically I finished all my school, and then I had to wait about 1.5 years for the stupid class to come around again. So like I was out in the world working and stuff, and then when the class came up, I took it. And same deal where you had to do a group project, but it was 2 people. And you had like all semester or whatever to work on it. But the guy that I was grouped up with was this huge pothead that literally never once showed up to class. So like, at least on my end, I was prepared for it, because I'm like, I'm just going to do this whole presentation, because I've saw the guy on the first day and then he's been gone. And so it gets to presentation day, and sure enough, he's not even there. So the teacher or the professor says, like, oh, can you do your presentation? I said, yeah. And so I went up and I did it all by myself, and I like that she was super impressed because I did the whole thing myself. Well, then the fucker on the very last day of class, because that was like the second to last week or third to last week. So the last week of class, the guy actually shows up because he knows he has to give this presentation in order to pass. And so he shows up and asks if he can do it. And the teacher's like, sure, Steve, do you mind presenting again? It's like, what the fuck? No.
yeah,
Make him do it by himself.
Right.
Like, but then because she said that, like, I had to re-present, but this time with a guy that I've never collaborated with, had no idea what the fuck he was going to talk about. And it was the most awkward thing in the world. But
yeah,
of course I got a passing grade, and I doubt he did.
Yeah.
But I was a little pissed at the professor. I'm like, wait, why are you throwing me into this fire again? Like, I've done my part.
I would have been like, no, I did mine. he doesn't even know what my presentation was about. Why? Like, we weren't partners here. But anyway, that's, school's terrible.
So thanks for listening to the non-essential.
School's terrible, and that's what this show is for.
Right. We teach you the stuff that you really should know, but didn't learn back then.
Oh, boy. My story is going to be really, really disappointing then.
Again, we talked about a goat man a few episodes back. I'm sure you'll be fine.
Yeah, it's at the very least it's intriguing. So, all right, well, let's go ahead and dig in. The year 1943 was one of great scientific advances for humanity. The Atomic Weapons Laboratory in Los Alamos, New Mexico was established. Development of the ENIAC computer began, and in the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard, the United States Navy carried out a series of top-secret tests aboard the USS Eldridge, a destroyer escort ship built just a few months before. The experiment sought to test aspects of Albert Einstein's unified field theory, particularly as it related to electromagnetism and gravity, with the goal of being able to render a ship invisible.
I just imagine, like, most of these stories are about, like, trying to make supervillains. Like... with the goal of making a real Doctor Doom.
And also, I just want to interject here at the very beginning that this is sounding way too professionally written and way too well read. Like, you need to slop it up some so that it fits in with the rest of our...
Yeah, you need a lot of uhs and he fucking...
I can't pronounce this name. I can't pronounce that. Steve, it says Ted. It's like, oh.
I just mispronounced laboratory as laboratory, so... I'm trying, okay? All right, anyway. So, early experiments conducted in the summer of 1943 showed promise in doing just that, rendering a ship invisible, but they came at a price. Many sailors aboard the Eldridge suffered physical effects, including nausea and headaches, as well as severe psychological effects.
I knew it. Fucking villains, man. He's going to be... horrifically scarred and like metal attached to him somehow, and the only thing that can save us is a human torch.
Well, we'll just continue. These impacts were apparently of little concern to the Navy. The U.S. was embroiled in World War II, as we all know, and victory was crucial. No cost was too high. A full-scale test was scheduled to take place on or around October 28, 1943. The test was a success. The Eldridge disappeared in a flash of brilliant blue light and reappeared near Norfolk, Virginia, over 200 miles away. There, the crew of the civilian merchant ship SS Andrew Furoseth witnessed the Eldridge for an unspecified time before the destroyer vanished once more, apparating in the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. The ship was found to have traveled 10 minutes back in time. This time, the side effects of the cloaking technology were far more severe. Upon reappearing, crew members were discovered to have become fused with bulkheads, been turned inside out, or disappeared altogether. Many of the sailors who survived suffered complete psychological breakdowns, and all were subjected to intense brainwashing in order to keep the results of the test, known today as the Philadelphia experiment, a secret.
I imagine like brainwashing just being like a code word for like, they made them some cocoa and fed them some snacks until they forgot about it.
Possibly.
Comfy slippers to put that whole horrible fusing with metal.
See, I'm picturing them standing behind the guys with like one of those blackjacks and just whacking him in the back of the head and be like, "Do you remember what happened?" "Yes." "Wham! Ow!" "Do you still remember?"
Exactly.
"Yeah, yes." "Wham! Ow!" "Do you remember?" "No, I swear I don't."
But if the test was such a success, why isn't cloaking technology used widely
It
today?
is. All right.
You just don't know.
I've watched Alex Jones.
Right.
It happens all the time.
Oh, God. Well, in this case, it's because the Philadelphia experiment was an elaborate hoax, largely attributed to the work of an amateur astronomer and UFO researcher named Morris K. Jessup. But
See,
how did he learn
you
about...
just got the phrase UFO researcher in your job title, you're automatically a seedy individual.
Yeah, and it's like when your name's Jessup, I feel like you should own a jelly company. You shouldn't be like dabbling in
Jessup's Jams.
Well, if it helps the story, his actual day job was he was an auto parts salesman.
Of course he was.
But how did Jessup learn of the testing to begin with if every sailor on board the Eldridge either went insane or was brainwashed? So the actual story behind the Philadelphia experiment began in 1955.
Well, no, that's just it. Like, if it weren't so perfect, he would have proof. You know, that's what makes it such a great government conspiracy.
I would have gotten away with it too if it weren't for those meddling
Would have
kids.
gotten away with it too if you hadn't kept hitting them over the head to make them forget.
Exactly. So in 1955, an annotated copy of Jessup's work called The Case for the UFO arrived at the Office of Naval Research. The Office of Naval Research proceeded to fund a 100-copy run of this work, including the annotations, in order to facilitate further study. So they didn't even research it. This printing became known as the Vero edition of The Case for the UFO, named for the Texas-based publisher who made the copies. The marginalia, the notes, had the appearance of being a conversational series of notes between three individuals. They were each written with a different pen, and they all varied slightly in their writing styles, like the actual penmanship. And the notes discussed details of an event that they referred to as the Philadelphia experiment and how it related to Jessup's UFO research. In 1956, received 2 letters from a man named Carl Allen. Allen, who also went by the name Carlos Allende,
That's not.
had served
Those
in...
aren't close at all.
He had a lot of aliases.
Who also went by Fernando.
Yeah. There was a point where someone interviewed this guy and noted that he spoke perfect Spanish, and it's like, okay.
All right.
Your point. So Carlos Allende stated that he had served in the Merchant Marines in the 1940s and claimed that he was aboard the SS Andrew Furoseth on the night that the USS Eldridge had mysteriously appeared near their location off the coast of Virginia. Morris Jessup ignored these letters, believing Allen to be, Carlos Allende, to be psychologically disturbed. However, when the Office of Naval Research contacted him regarding his work in 1957, Jessup found himself drawn into this saga of the Philadelphia experiment. Jessup compared the writing in the Vero edition to that of the letters that he'd received from Allen and concluded that the notes were all written by Carl Allen, just with different pens. But by that time, the Vero edition of his work about UFOs had entered circulation, even though it was very limited run, and his findings were largely ignored with regards to the origin of the notes. Jessup tried to capitalize on this newfound exposure by publishing additional works on his UFO research, but these were rejected by publisher after publisher. His wife left him in 1958, and on April 20th, 1959, Morris Jessup was found dead in his home at Dade County, Florida, a hose pumping deadly exhaust fumes through the rear window of his still-running car.
Attached to a UFO up in the sky.
Yeah. And his death was ruled a suicide. Jessup was gone, but the Philadelphia experiment was just coming to life. The Vero edition of Jessup's work inspired such works such as Invisible Horizons, True Mysteries of the Sea by Vincent Gaddis, Thin Air by George E. Simpson and Neil R. Berger, and The Philadelphia Experiment, Project Invisibility by Charles Berlitz and William L. Moore. Berlitz and Moore's work, which was presented as factual but actually pretty much plagiarized Thin Air, was adapted into the 1984 film The Philadelphia Experiment. The events of the film were later corroborated as true by an alleged member of the crew for the USS Eldridge named Alfred Bielek. The media ran with Bielek's story, and the Philadelphia Experiment hoax gained widespread attention.
It's amazing how much of this stuff, like 3 books and a movie, and then somebody coming out and saying, oh yeah, this is all true, like all from like one minor little hoax that like was already exposed.
Once you put something to paper, for some reason people are really eager to jump on it. So once you have that initial like, hey, this has been published, they wouldn't publish it if they were just making shit up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's kind of how it ends up going. So, was there any factual basis to Carlos Allende's claim that a naval ship had teleported through space and time, or was it a complete fabrication? The historian Mike Dash noted that few authors who relied heavily on Jessup's book, the Vero edition, did little additional research of their own. Basically, they just took this Vero edition as gospel. And then, they all claimed that Carlos Allende was either difficult or impossible to find, but Dash had no problem finding him, and others who looked further into this had no problem tracking him down. So...
Yeah, that's kind of like when you're at work and your boss asks you to like, oh, I need you to call this client, and you're like, I don't have their phone number and there's no way to look it up. And everybody else is like, it's right there in the system. You're like, nope, impossible.
Yeah, but that's one phone number. You have to crack a whole code of them to get to, it's just a long process. And it's like, no.
Well, and for, Allen's part, it's not like he wanted to disappear. He'd grown upset at this point by having his letters published without his permission and without recompense. So he'd been reaching out to people since the late 60s to set the record straight.
That's even better. It's like, we can't find this guy. It's like, he's on line 1 for you. He's pissed that you're publishing his stuff. It's like, just mystery. I don't does he even really exist? He's right here.
That bullshit you're making money off of, that's my bullshit. Excuse me, why are you walking away?
Exactly. So in a series of letters to Dr. Jacques Vallee, an astronomer, computer scientist, venture capitalist, ufologist, That's his term. And
An
author.
all-around playboy.
Well, I saw a picture of him. That's pretty accurate. He looked pretty smooth, suave, sophisticated.
Unnatural.
Pretty much. So, in these letters, Carl Allen attempted to sell his personal copy of the Vero edition of Jessup's work, into which he had entered even more notes, and claimed now to have suffered from the effects of being exposed to this event, noting particularly that his hair had fallen out in clumps shortly after the Eldridge had disappeared. Dr. Vallee did not take Allen up on this offer. But Carl Allen was not done telling his story. He hoped to capitalize on the dogged longevity of his original hoax, and he reemerged periodically over the years, giving more and more details to whoever would listen. The details, particularly the physical effects that he had suffered, resembled those of radiation exposure, causing some to speculate that the accident was the product of a nuclear experiment gone wrong, as opposed to an electromagnetic thing.
As opposed to UFOs.
So it's all, and it's also just coincidence that he remembered more of these after effects as a society we all learned more about radiation.
Yeah, exactly. And happens to overlap with the period, of the Manhattan Project and Los Alamos spinning up into production and things like that, just really digging into that like nuclear panic.
Breaking news, radiation poisoning can make your hair fall out. By golly, my hair fell out. I forgot.
Exactly. So he also claimed that during this time he had been in contact not only with Morris Jessup. Now, keep in mind, Jessup never responded to his letters. He wrote Carl Allen off as a loon. He never wrote him back. He shoved the letters away, and they were only discovered after his death. But he also claimed that Albert Einstein himself had been in contact with him to discuss what occurred and then also teach him physics.
Because that's what, that's what happened. Now,
yeah, Einstein really had time for this.
And turn to chapter 3.
Yeah, Einstein really had time for this stuff. So by 1980, author Robert A. Gorman had found enough evidence on Carl Allen, including an interview with Allen's father, Harry, to determine that the story was almost certainly a hoax. He'd discovered that Allen had a history of fabricating sensational tales, and even in a letter to his parents, Allen had admitted that his story of what had happened that night aboard the SS Andrew Furuseth was a complete fabrication. And then in addition, not that this is a bad thing in and of itself, but he found overwhelming evidence that Allen was a long-standing sufferer of mental illness. So, but his revelations, which he wrote about in a sci-fi magazine, did little to halt the hoax's spread.
Of course not.
And then the personnel at the shipyard originally attributed the alleged event to a misunderstanding of routine research, which only fanned the flames of conspiracy theorists.
Because it's like, they're all denying it. It must be true.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And that was one of the things I've been wanting to point out, where they say, the sailors that weren't dead got brainwashed. But they didn't appear to brainwash the people on the merchant ship that saw it, or the people in the port in Philadelphia that saw the ship return. It's like, exactly. We don't want this to get out, so we're going to brainwash these 4 specific people.
Yeah, exactly. So some of these theorists claimed that the disappearance of the ship was the result of the use of degaussing equipment, which was pretty common by that point. And that was meant to render ships, quote unquote, invisible to magnetically attractive torpedoes and underwater mines. Other theorists, conspiracy theorists, claimed that the phenomenon could have been similar to the coronal projections seen surrounding the higher frequency generators like those aboard the experimental vessel USS Timmerman. But even if the ship had been fitted with either of those technologies, neither would have resulted in the Eldridge disappearing, nor would they have had any physical or psychological effect on the crew. In addition, the Office of Naval Research, the agency that supposedly conducted this experiment, wasn't established until 1946, 3 years after this allegedly occurred. And thus could not
have time travel, remember?
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean.
Yeah. But, nice try, Kelly.
Exactly. So, and later, the crew members of the Eldridge that survived came together and confirmed that the ship had never even made it to port in Philadelphia. Furthermore, the master of the USS Andrew Furuseth, Lieutenant Junior Grade William S. Dodge, gave a written statement denying that anything relating to the alleged events of that night had occurred. Carl Allen died as Carlos Allende on March 5, 1994, in VA hospice care. In a deathbed statement interview given to the News of Colorado Centennial Country in 1986, he clung to his version of events and even alleged that Morris Jessup's death was not a suicide but a cover-up.
Yeah.
His so-called deathbed statement, along with the revelation of naval technologies such as diffused light camouflage, which the Canadian and United States navies were working on as early as 1941, keep giving the Philadelphia experiment hoax fresh life.
I just love somebody like who's just, his entire life is just built on being full of shit, and right onto his deathbed, you think like, oh, maybe this will be it. Maybe he'll say something true. And he's like, fuck you, all in, and just like.
They can't.
Yeah, he really did go all in. And
that's the ultimate debate ender anyway. You say your piece and then die, and they can't fucking say anything back.
Yeah, that's the ultimate fingers in ears, la 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 argument trick.
Yeah, it's just right. Unfortunately, he gave this deathbed statement in 1986, almost 8 years before he died. So
I was going to point that out too. Like that I was getting the kick out of that, but
and then even then, the News of Colorado Centennial Country is one of those little mom and pop.
Yeah. But it's so great. Just I imagine him like over dramatizing it. I mean, come closer.
It made the front page.
Everything I've ever said is completely true. I've never been wrong.
Pretty much. Exactly.
Get me a pudding cup.
I like to think that the 8 years between the statement and his actual death was just one long, like Shakespearean death, like rattle.
Yeah.
The light. It dims.
From what I found, he basically bounced from facility to facility during those last years. It was actually kind of sad.
As kind of late life, sort of medical care is.
He was only, if I recall it, I didn't note it here, but I think he was only about 68 when he died. So he was fairly
So you're
young.
telling me he was taken out too.
Comparatively
poisoning will do that to you. Yeah.
So the United States Navy, for the record, has disavowed all knowledge of this alleged event. They claim it would go against all known laws of physics.
Despite many conspiracy theorists kicking representatives of the Navy saying, tell the truth, they still stick to the official story.
Yeah. Yep. And that Albert Einstein's work with the Navy during 1943 and 1944 had to do with ordnance and explosives, not his unified field theory. So basically, they confirmed but didn't confirm that Einstein was working on the bomb. So they.
But see, this is all stuff. And that's exactly what you would say if you're trying to cover something up. You say we didn't do that,
but
it's very suspicious.
But that is like so much better than like to be like, well, we couldn't have been doing this evil thing. We were making the bomb.
Well, they didn't flat out state that in their statement. They just said his work had to do with ordnance and explosives, and it's like, okay, well now further documents have been declassified. We know he was working on the bomb.
He was just the one that painted the like pinup ladies on the sides of the bombs, though. Like you see in Hollywood, he had nothing to do with the physics of it.
No.
How can I make these look cooler?
Yeah, most people don't realize
artiste.
Einstein was. Yeah, he's very
And
artistic.
tattoo parlors everywhere thanked him for his contribution to the field.
So, the Navy concluded their statement with the following quote. After many years of searching, the staff of the Operational Archives and independent researchers have not located any official documents that support the assertion that an invisibility or teleportation experiment involving a Navy ship occurred at Philadelphia or any other location. So that's all they had to say about it.
Yeah, that's what's funny to me too, because I mean, you could try to make the conspiracy theorists. There's no like idea that's too far flung for them to just like weave it into their headcanon on this stuff. But
exactly.
If they had in World War II developed cloaking technology that would work on a big battleship, I think we'd all know it by now, because something would have happened in the intervening almost 80 years, I guess. That
exactly.
Right,
exactly.
we've had conflicts, and the ship would have been sunk by an invisible ship, and we'd have been like, aha!
Well,
I mean, the closest that we get is that diffused light camouflage, which a lot of people trying to debunk this keep coming back to. And basically that's just providing counter light so that the ship just kind of blends into the horizon.
Yeah. And that's more effective on small vessels and airplanes and stuff. But it is, I mean, that's what's interesting. And I think that's what fuels these conspiracy theories is
exactly.
They are things that are being and have been being researched, and they have made, strides in them.
And then you get these revelations through the years of things like, Area 51 is actually real. So then all these conspiracy theorists working on their individual pet projects froth at the mouth. Well, if that was true, mine might be true. And it just kind of kicks
well, that was what I was about to say, is like, if the Navy just came out and said like, oh yeah, we were doing all that. And like the conspiracy theorists would be
right?
like, that means you were doing all this shit too. And it's like,
means you weren't doing it.
yeah. Or they would go the other way. It's like, actually, it was perfectly normal.
I just appreciate how that final statement is, we've searched, we have not located any official documents. And it's
yeah.
Okay, that's kind of a wishy-washy.
I was going to say that's like your most standard, because and you alluded to it. I assume that the ship, the Eldritch, is a real ship. That's something that can be verified.
Yes. It was a real ship. It was commissioned in 1943. It received its commission just a few months before this experiment allegedly took place. There's a lot of different versions of the Philadelphia experiment. The version that I gave was kind of a amalgamation of them all. And
like the most accepted, generic version. Generic's the wrong word, but yeah.
Some of them even have this taking place during the ship's original shakedown run in the Bahamas. So, the records of the ship's logs are all preserved on microfilm. They're publicly accessible, and as far as the Philadelphia aspect of the timeline and of what happened, the ship's logs absolutely blow it out of the water. But then you've got the theorists that are like, well, those could have been falsified.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say the Philadelphia experiment was when my favorite team won the Super Bowl, and then fans were on the street eating shit, like horse shit for no reason. Like, your team won and you're eating horse shit. So like, that was the real plot.
There definitely had to be some government
the Super Bowl trophy
there
the Super Bowl trophy appeared and then disappeared.
It was in Tom Brady's hand. The football was in Tom Brady's hands, and then it just disappeared due to cloaking.
As did some of the air in the football.
That's I like conspiracy theorist shit. that just like the stubbornness, like we've talked about similar stuff before, but just like how just it survives for decades. And just like
this is, I see. I've heard, I was familiar with the story in general, but like I hadn't heard about how, and it just is. It's so entertaining to me. Like it's rare that you can actually pin like basically the exact origins of a hoax story down, and then still have so many people be like, nope, like, but we have it right here. And they're like, nope, fake.
So here's weirdness, and how things spread, like the most fucked up version of the telephone game ever. So, you have the Philadelphia experiment that inspires sci-fi authors and things of that nature, and it inspires other conspiracy theorists, of course. But one of these conspiracy theories was the Montauk Project.
Montauk sounds like a Crash Bandicoot villain.
Yeah, and to bring it all contemporary, the Montauk Project is allegedly one of the inspirations behind the very popular Netflix series Stranger Things. So it's just like, it's just weird how things and take on lives of their own. And it's like, the Philadelphia experiment didn't actually happen. But how I became aware of this is, I'd read about it years ago and just kind of, I blew it off. But then my roommate brought it up. He's like, I heard something about a ship where, that disappeared and traveled through time and people warped into the walls. And I'm like, I've heard of this.
I've done this. This was from my life.
No, that is alleged and cannot be proven. But I was reading into that, and then you guys are like, want to come back? I was like, oh, do I have a story for you?
That was also one of my like favorite parts of the story. Always has been, about the sailors like warping into the walls, because you can't help but get this mental image of this like way more grotesque, fucked up version of Han Solo from Star Wars. Just like
or if you've ever watched Doctor Who. Cassandra, the piece of flesh stretched on a frame, yelling, "Moisturize me, moisturize me." I just picture stuff like that.
See,
I'd be the sailor that gets morphed into the toilet and be like, "Son of a bitch!"
Having not watched Doctor Who, that is a horrifying, creepypasta image you've just put in my head.
She's beautiful. Her makeup is on point.
Yeah, and I have dry skin too. I can't give anyone shit. Yeah, that's good stuff. Good topics. That's what we bring every week. Except some weeks we don't. This might be one of those weeks for me. I'm not sure. Steve, you have stuff. You always have stuff ready.
No, okay. I don't. I do, but I'm lazy and I want to save it for next week, so then I don't have to.
Well, I have stuff we can do. We should have planned this out before we recorded, but
no, you plan it during the show while you're recording. That's how we've always done it. That's how we're always going to do it. We
always make the decision that Steve will do less work on the show. We decide that live every week. Okay, so my stuff, I feel like it feels like every other week I'm talking about Old West shit, but we're going back to the Old West this week.
The Wild Wild West.
The Wild West.
Yes.
So most people know about Jesse James, and if you've heard of him, you probably know about Robert Ford, the guy who killed him. If you don't know that story, I just want to do a little abridged version of it because it's a little entertaining to me. So Jesse James, the notorious Old West outlaw, was killed by a fellow gang member named Robert Ford. Ford and his brother were promised a reward and amnesty for their crimes if they took James out. Ford shot James in the back of the head while James was adjusting a picture in his home. This act cemented James as a legend and Ford as a dirty little coward, according newspaper reputation, and that reputation would stay with him for the rest of his days. Which was kind of a weird rep to slap on that dude, because the public opinion at that time was, we need to stop Jesse James by any means.
No. By any means that are fair.
Honorable.
There's rules to follow. Right.
That man's a legend. You duel him, all right, for being a fucking thief. But that's, the public for you. Ford would go on to try his hand running saloons and losing at shooting contests for about the next 10 years. Because it turns out shooting somebody point blank in the back of the head is a lot easier than hitting a target.
Hence the plan in the first place.
Right. When his saloon burnt down in a major fire, he reopened it as a tent until he could rebuild the actual building. This was when a man named Edward O'Kelly entered Ford's tent with a shotgun, said, "Hello, Bob," and when Ford turned around, he was shot and killed instantly. O'Kelly became the man who killed Robert Ford, and because people randomly decided Ford was a piece of shit for doing what they told him to do, a $7,000 signature petition got O'Kelly off the hook.
Wait. So when Ford did it to James, it was a despicable act and punishable by death. But when
they wanted him to die, but he got amnesty. So, but then
But then this guy does basically the same. He let him turn around, but it sounds like it was still
right. So
and it's like, hero, get him out of here. He can't keep on good at jail.
Yeah. So a 7,000 signature petition got O'Kelly off the hook, and he was released due to a quote medical condition, which they probably didn't actually know if he even had one, but because they probably were just like, hey, he killed the horrible coward. Regardless, O'Kelly did get killed 2 years later trying to shoot a police officer, and I'm sure that police officer proudly walked around saying he killed the coward who killed the coward who killed Jesse James.
I was going to say, it's turning into Highlander here.
Right. And that cycle probably goes on.
There can be only one.
That cycle goes on to this very day, I imagine. There's probably somebody who killed the coward who killed the coward who killed the coward, and just go all the way back to Jesse James. But I just wanted to bring that up. I'm not here to talk about Robert Ford. I just like how that story ends, because it's so baffling to me how people are like, fuck you, Ford.
Yeah.
And there was it was kind of slow, but it was a pretty decent movie about this whole thing. Anyway, back to Jesse James though. So when it came out that Jesse had been killed, people really didn't believe it. Mostly because as an outlaw, Jesse was pretty good at disappearing, and people had just heard so many untrue rumors about his death before. Despite the fact that Jesse was probably just a self-centered piece of shit human being, the culture in the South raised him up as this Robin Hood figure against, quote, Northern oppression. Despite the fact that he probably didn't rob from the rich and give to the poor any more than any other basic fucking criminal at that time. He was a celebrity, and people don't believe celebrities are dead, just like they don't believe it now. So it's not surprising that unless you showed people the body, they would just latch on to any rumor that kind of kept his legend going. What wasn't helping this misinformation was the fact that more than a dozen men would claim to be the infamous Jesse James, having cheated death. Which would be a fucking great idea if it were true. Fake your death so well that nobody knows what to believe, and then just pop up in 2 years guess what, guys? Those crimes would just disappear. It'd be...
Yeah. That'd be the best part, is you could walk into town and be like, I'm Jesse James, and people would be like, bullshit. You're like, yes.
Well, no, because people believe it, so it's well, if you are, you're under arrest. Right now.
Well, that's true, too.
That's the whole problem with this... with all these imposters plots. So despite the fact that Jesse's own son dug up the body from his grandmother's property to be moved to a cemetery and could confirm on his own that the body was indeed Jesse's, once the body had left the watch of the James family officially, that's when the imposters really started to show up. One of the first was a banker in the 1880s who showed up one day in Texas, but never talked about his life before showing up there, not even to his own son. Rather than actually pretending to be Jesse James, though, people just assumed that meant he had to be Jesse James based off nothing but being private and probably a killer before he got there. Like, that's the best assumption. But he just didn't say anything, so it's like, you're Jesse James.
Who are you, partner? That's not important. You're Jesse James.
I knew it. Famous outlaw.
I'm Jesse James, bitch.
Yeah, he made Super Freak and a lasting hit. In the early 1930s, a recluse in the mountains named James Sears apparently loved to quiz local townspeople on Jesse James trivia and adamantly insisted that the James death was a hoax. After his death, a friend revealed that Sears, quote, confessed to being James, and apparently the physical resemblance was close enough that those townspeople believed it. But being just kind of popular for being delusional among some locals wasn't enough for some. One day, a drifter came to L.A. claiming to be Jesse James, but he also went by the name John James. He was apparently so convincing that he managed to get local officials to accompany him to the Capitol to ask for an official pardon for all of his crimes. He told police that the Ford brothers and him planned the murder of another gang member for double-crossing them, and then they had that man buried under his name, saying, "Why, I was present at my own funeral."
So then on what grounds was he asking for a pardon? Be like, look, we murdered some different guy, so will you pardon me instead?
Basically. He said that he had wandered for 40 years and thought he might lecture on the folly of crime for pay if charges were dropped. So he thought, like, hey, I'll talk about it if you drop those charges. But this man only came to attention of the public because he got in a big argument with Jesse James Jr.'s wife, Stella James, the real Jesse James' daughter-in-law. He had threatened her after a confrontation in Missouri where Stella produced one of her father-in-law's wedding shoes. It was a size 6.5 that was way too small for this imposter. Rather than lock him up, again, taking credit for these crimes is just the most batshit thing of all of this to me. And especially thinking you can get, like, they would just drop it because it's been so long. Authorities questioned him in a sanity hearing. There, a judge named Frank Weichheiser, who claimed to have known Jesse from when he was a kid, asked the man to hold his hands up. When he did, Weichheiser asked him, "Where's your finger off?" The man responded, "My finger was never off." "Good night," Weichheiser said in disgust and walked away. When asked to explain, Weichheiser told the other judge that the real Jesse had accidentally chopped the tip of a finger off with his left hand with a machete, though others claim this part came off from a gun accident. This John James had 10 perfectly intact fingers.
This will be good for all future James impersonators.
It apparently didn't end too badly for John. At least not right away. So he was exposed in the LA area, but not entirely across the nation. John would be arrested on an impersonation charge and obtaining money under false pretenses, where he would give lectures about himself as the notorious Jesse James in a couple years from there. But while the details of his life kind of peter out, it said around this point, John James would live the rest of his days in a mental hospital in Arkansas. So it is kind of like there is, in one of my sources, it does go further into like the sort of sanity hearing he undergoes. And it is kind of a sad, like, this guy's clearly not well, but he totally believes that he's actually Jesse James. Or he just likes getting money for it. And is committed to the lie. We've done so many of these stories, it's a little hard to tell. So after John James's death in December 1947, a new challenger for the throne of James appeared. A J. Frank Dalton claimed to be the 100-year-old James, and people believed it, because they believe anything. Dalton, to his credit, knew a lot about James's life, although there was a decent amount of holes in his knowledge as well. Promoters he had hired ascribed these lapses as due to an old age memory loss condition.
Convenient.
Yeah. Dalton kept the story going until his death in 1951, and his promoter even had his tombstone labeled with Jesse James's birth date and name alongside Dalton's death date with the words supposedly killed in 1882. This conspiracy theory in particular would last until the 1990s, when a forensic science professor said, "This is fucking stupid. The dude is dead, and he died when Robert Ford shot him." I'm sure that's an actual quote.
Yeah, like
most certainly
in his dissertation, right? That was the title of the paper.
It was the title of the paper was "Hey, dumbass." Professor,
and then followed by 600 pages of he's dead, he's dead, he's dead, he's
findings show he's fucking dead.
In conclusion, give me tenure. The end.
So Professor James Starrs, having a reputation for historical exhumations up to that point, gained the support of the James family members and a court order to dig up James's actual coffin, the one that was originally at his mother's property and then moved to a cemetery. Starrs was to use a mitochondrial, which my word processor doesn't believe is an actual word, so I'm assuming it's like midi-chlorians and other Star Wars terms. So mitochondrial DNA, which is passed down the female line to test the relationship between the remains with the descendants of Jesse's sister, Susan. This wouldn't prove that the body was Jesse 100%, but it would prove that it was related to the family and not just some random gang member thrown in a coffin, which most of these imposter theories claim. The exhumation became a bit of a circus, but once they dug the coffin up, they realized it was a wooden coffin and had rotted and exposed the remains to groundwater.
Interesting note. I've actually been to the Jesse James Museum that's in...
the Wax Museum?
Is it?
Okay.
No, it's the house where he died in St. Joseph.
All right, because I was going to say, this Dalton guy, well, he dies... He dies in 1951, but the people like built a wax museum putting out like, no, he's really him.
No, this was the actual house that he was shot in. And I went there in 1996.
Oh, wow.
So they had just dug up the coffin.
Yeah.
And what they had on display, and I have photos of this somewhere. They had the nails and the non-decomposed objects, aside from the skeleton and clothing and all of that, of course, because that was still being tested. But they had like the coffin nails and other non-degradable objects on display at this museum, and they're like, it's all very exciting. We just dug him up. This is all that was left of his coffin, and we're waiting on the test results to confirm that it was indeed Jesse James. But the funny thing was, the room that he was actually shot in, the hole from the bullet was still in the wall, and they framed it. It was very macabre.
Yeah.
And it was really high up on the wall. And I guess that was because Ford was shooting from the floor.
Yeah.
And James was up on some kind of like step stool or chair or something. And so he had fired up an angle.
Yeah, that's like, I mean, you don't know unless you were there, but any like depiction of the story is always like James climbs up on a stepping stool or something, and Ford is on the floor level, so it would make sense.
Yeah, there were lots of drawings of, that artists had created of the actual moment that the bullet went through James's head. It was very weird. And the obsession with his death was very disturbing.
Yeah, like I said, like this whole research process became a circus, and like people were like wearing T-shirts like "Dig up Jesse," and like people get excited for anything.
Dig him up.
Yeah.
So the remains got exposed to groundwater, which limited what was usable for any sort of DNA test. But they did find several teeth that were in a good enough condition they could use. They also found a tie pin, kind of what you were talking about. There were items on him that were not degraded and stuff, and it's kind of neat that they got collected for like a museum or something. So they found a tie pin which matched an 1882 photograph of his body, and they also found a bullet from a 1851 Navy revolver that caused a noted chest wound Jesse had received during the Civil War. So with these findings, Stars presented his final results at a 1996 meeting of the American Academy of Forensic Sciences in Nashville to an audience of his peers, several Jesse James imposters, Jesse James's descendants, and descendants of Dalton's. Stars revealed that the DNA taken from the teeth matched the samples from Jesse's sister's descendants. They also matched those of hair samples found in an earlier 1978 excavation, which made me wonder, why do you have to dig them up again if you already knew this shit? So like I said, this doesn't 100% mean that the body was Jesse's, but it would be a fucking hell of a coincidence.
Yeah, especially with that circumstantial evidence. Like, of course, the tie clip could be it, because you dress the body for burial after the fact, so you, of course, grab Jesse's stuff.
The guy we talked about last week got a hold of him and dressed him up.
Yeah. But the chest wound thing, I mean, what's the chances that they picked a random gang member that also had a very similar chest wound with a bullet lodged in him? This is shared family DNA.
Right. So Dalton's supporters were annoyed, and 5 years later tried to dig up Dalton's body up for their own tests.
We can dig bodies too.
Which is a hilarious idea, made even funnier by the fact that they dug up the wrong guy.
Oh no.
After they noticed, and they only noticed after the body came up and it only had one arm. This body was a William Henry Holland, and you can believe the Holland family was good and pissed that these dipshits exhumed their loved one.
I thought you were going to say the Holland family started to say, wait, our loved one was Jesse James.
No, there's to prove like a dumbass publicity stunt, as a true thing. It's like, this thing seems really dumb, but if I found out somebody I cared about, you violated their grave to be like, no, this old fuck from 1950 is Jesse James, I would be so annoyed. I would be suing the fuck out of him, which is where the story ends, because Dalton's believers say they will try to dig him up again when they can raise the money for it, but they're probably broke because they fucked up.
Yeah,
and
probably guess they. I like that, though. They're like, this family member that we really loved and cared about was Jesse James, but we don't know where he's buried for sure.
Yeah.
He's over here somewhere.
Well, it's they probably got confused because they labeled the dude's grave as Jesse James instead of Dalton, and it's oh, fuck, we can't find Dalton anywhere. The Holland kind of looks like Dalton. So, yeah, that's just a little story about Jesse James's imposters and what
it is. You have a very good point. It seems really weird, to come out and be like, "Hey, that guy that you all wanted to hang for his crimes, that's me."
Yeah, it's like,
but don't hang me though.
It's like some guy bragging about being Jack the Ripper. The only people who would do that are people who are already caught for murder. No.
And by
there
the
was
rule of murder,
there was a similar thing surrounding the death of Billy the Kid.
Yeah, it's actually,
there were multiple imposters that came forward that don't. No, I'm really Billy the Kid. I survived.
Yeah.
It's and you touched on this too. It's a weird side effect of this thing that happened in that era of American history where you had these people that were literally the worst people that were just murdering. The cow wars were a thing, and it was it's okay to just murder people, but that makes you a bad guy, but kind of a good guy too.
Yeah.
And then I get that's why people were pissed about Ford killing Jesse James, because he's a bad guy and he needs to be stopped. but his story can't end like that. He's a hero. It's like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Which is it? We're like,
Well, even with my, with the Philadelphia experiment with Carlos Allende, once that story started to circulate, there were many people that came forward and claimed to be this Carlos Allende, but they couldn't back it up.
I like that they wouldn't just say they were a different person from the Philadelphia experiment.
So
I am the Carlos Allende.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly. I didn't want to dive into that too deeply. I'm not sure when he became legally known as Carlos Allende, but
it was the best day of his life and mine.
Well, the reason he had multiple names is during the experiment he fused with multiple sailors.
But even, when you go through the actual documentation that exists, and this is actually supported by newspaper clippings that verify people that became part of the Merchant Marines on this given day or during this given time period. He was documented there under his birth name, which was Carl Meredith Allen. And then the documentation when he entered the Merchant Marines is, under Carl Allen. So like I said, I didn't want to dive into when he actually changed his name, but there was a bunch of pseudonyms that he went by. It was,
I gave him some shit for it, but Carlos Allende is that's such a great name. And the thing these conspiracy people fuck up at is they stick with it to their death. And it's you need to cut and run. So just get your publicity up high enough so that you can become Carlos Allende, and then you make a hot sauce because Allende is such a great hot sauce name. And then it's then that's just a little side fact is
use your notoriety for something legitimate, and then by that point you've won.
Open up that Mexican restaurant, man. Open it up, Carlos.
So just wait. Next week, I'm going to give us my topic will be how Carlos Allende was Jesse James.
And then we're getting into the fiction section of this podcast.
And then that will really expose that I don't pay attention to the show at all after I edit it. Because
we'll have gone fully into fringe science. But if we're going to go full fringe, I'm going to practice my Anna Torv impersonation, get my long blonde.
Oh yeah, we've hit on some out there.
I mean, every couple of months I have to hit a reset button and I go full blown fiction with these goddamn creepypastas, and that is that's how I palate cleanse a lot of the real stuff that is terrible. I have to read a story about a goat man that confuses me for days. So those are some stories.
See, these weeks are great because I don't have to do shit. Yeah. But I learned stuff about, of course I know who Jesse James was, but I didn't know all that about the imposters and stuff after his death. And again, I had heard of the Philadelphia experiment, and I kind of knew the basic lore behind it, but I didn't know all that stuff. So I got to sit here and just learn.
Yeah, and that's what's great about this show is if you're a student, we just wrote 2 papers for you. Because I guarantee your teacher will not find this show. So
that's true. You just gave me when we used to write about video games. I always had this stupid idea, not idea, but I thought it would be cool to get a quote from one of your reviews on the box. Yeah. How video games kids used to have boxes that they came in before they were all digital. But anyway. Now, my goal is for us to get cited in some kid's school project, paper.
And then write an apology letter to that kid's parents. We didn't... it was a comment.
Little Johnny's going to have to repeat 5th grade because he listened to our show. Our bad.
It's a comedy show.
Just remember... But I think the craziest thing about my story was that at one point this... Carl Allen had actually gotten in touch, because taking place during World War II, actually got in touch with Werner von Braun.
God, how annoying would it be to be like a high profile person from an event like that, and you'd have these people contacting you all the time, like.
And there was a whole aspect to this story where, Einstein was working on the Philadelphia experiment, experimenting with gravity and electromagnetism, but that's because Nazi Germany was working on anti-gravity devices.
I have it on authority.
Yeah, it was just
I have plenty of materials on my bookshelf saying the Nazis were working on Hellboy technology. And we had to counter
they were after the Ark of the Covenant. We know that. It's well documented in film.
Professor Jones describes it in detail.
Right. They were super close to weaponizing that. I mean, we dodged a bullet there.
Oh man. Yeah, so that's the show this week. Thank you again, Kelly, for coming on and letting Steve just sort of daydream or whatever he does when the pressure's not on.
Yeah, I don't want to know.
The only thing that I'm regretting now is I said, no, you go, not me. But my topic, I just realized there was a part of it, one of the events in it would have happened exactly 149 years ago to the day that this show would be going live. And I thought that was cool. Now that's all thrown off because my topic will be a week later. But
you're going to have to save it for an entire year.
I could, so and that would make it 150.
Exact 150.
Yeah, if we're doing this in a year, then something's gone wrong.
By that point, it'll be me talking to a wall, pretend like in my head I think I'm doing a podcast, and I'll have made up some dramatic falling out in my head, and then I'll start doing a separate podcast where I just talk to this crazy crab bobblehead. Yeah, the really fucking essential podcast.
The Who Needs Steve podcast, and nobody knows what it's talking about.
Crabs. The podcast.
Yeah, every show description, just like the word crab, like typed more and more.
It's just every podcast is about crabs somehow. Either people who have them, or people who eat them, or the actual creatures. I suppose.
People who are them.
The people who hear them, even in their sleep.
Crab people.
Yeah, I'm not fucking around with this crab thing. Like, if you don't follow me on Twitter, the running joke is like I have this fucking baseball mascot bobblehead on my desk, but it turns around on its own and shit, and we talk about it on this show. Like, I'm not supernatural, but this thing is definitely haunted.
Yeah, and I can vouch for that. As far as taking your word for it, because we've been literally talking. He's like, I got to turn the thing around. It's too creepy. And then 10 minutes later, he'll be like, it's
how the fuck did turn? Yeah, like mid.
Didn't you break its arm off and a whole bunch of creepy shit happened?
I mean, he stared at me. He was pretty pissed about it, but I glued it back on. He should be okay.
One person is going to die every day until you fix my damn arm, Ben.
No, but if you want to see how this thing kills me, follow me on Twitter.
I mean, just send me a direct message if it starts crying blood.
But if you've seen some of the photos, it looks like its flesh is melting under its eyeballs.
Yeah,
it does.
It's creepy.
It does. It's really creepy.
It's like the crazy crab. Like, my brother showed it to me one day. I was like, oh, that's a really dumb baseball mascot. And then it's become this horrifying obsession for me. And I don't think...
and ultimately the cause of your demise.
Yeah.
Probably. I hate to be naked.
He'll be on the rim of a volcano attempting to throw it in, and then instead he'll fall in, and the crab will just be standing there staring with a smile on its face.
I offer you salvation. It's like, what the fuck? It does have like a mouth that just looks like it's going to just vomit blood on me.
It does. Y'all should really follow Ben on Twitter, because the pictures of this thing are nightmare fuel.
Well, it's like I have a folder of just like actual photos of the costume, And it's in like,
and those are bad
and
enough.
those are bad enough
Yeah.
because it's like him, this fucking costume in a warehouse or a dark like museum area or something. And then like I got this bobblehead from a friend. The guy's like my best friend, and he fucking killed me here by giving me this haunted bobblehead.
Okay, but hear me out. You need to get in contact with Taps. and I really think there would be some benefit to getting one of those, infrared night camera motion sensitive things on that thing 24/7.
I always wanted to have my own ghost hunting show where I would just go to like famous haunted locations and spend the night and be like, yeah, it was creepy, but nothing really happened. And then like, I think a good
the footage later is like 18 ghosts, like
just like
playing hacky sack around your sleeping meat
like
sack.
I have like fucking 2 black eyes, my face is all swollen. They just fucking ganged up and beat the shit out of me in my sleep. I'm like, yeah, I felt a chill.
I still don't.
I must have fallen. I must have fallen down the stairs.
But I think that would be a good pilot episode, is me just like staring at this crab for 24 hours.
I'd watch it. You should throw it up on YouTube as a live stream.
I was just about to say,
maybe get on Twitch.
Tune into the Non-Essential podcast in a couple of weeks when it's literally just us sitting here quiet. So we're doing that. What do they call it? The EVP
The
or whatever.
EVP.
Yeah, the EVP episode. It's like, we won't touch it. We'll just record an hour of silence with the crab sitting next to Ben's mic. And then it's up to you, the listeners, to play the audio back and see if you hear anything.
That's my type of charity stream. Where it's like 24 hours, me and the crazy crab staring contest.
I mean, real talk, I do have good friends that are like, real tight with that Taps crew. So if you ever want an actual investigation on that thing, just
I
let me
don't
know.
want those freaks in my house.
I was going to say, if they listen to like one episode of our podcast, they'll be like, we're never talking to these assholes.
It's like, I don't want those bastards like we're going to set up a camera here, here, and here. And it's like, you know what? I do shit in my house, okay? And I don't need that shit recorded, okay? I don't need that out in the world. Well, and on that note,
I'm mentally scarred for life.
Mental image. I'll see you fuckers next week.
Toodaloo.